that's widely accepted as canon and fair enough. But then in the lead up to Street Fighter 4, there were these things called the Street Fighter 4 Aftermath, and they released these little animated, like kind of trailers. They were like 5 minutes, and I think there were about 4 of them as a way to promote Street Fighter 4 before it came out. And in Sea Vipers, there's sort of an alternate take. But if you remember, in Street Fighter 4, Bison has a particular costume where he's just kind of like destroyed and burnt up, and like his clothes are all messed up. I think that's a reference to this moment where he blew himself up.
I have a question. What the hell?
Yeah. Buckle up, buckaroo, because here we go. So been having fun exploring Luke and such, and then I wanted to make sure to shout out this week. I think I forgot last week. One of our regular listeners and readers on the website, Reborn Odin. That guy always has something like constructive and like relevant to say. But yeah, I just want to say I appreciate Reborn Odin. Thank you for all of your contributions. Thank you for checking things out. Thanks for being awesome. And yeah.
Some of the comments that he leaves are some of the like most long and detailed and well thought out comments on our website. I'm actually really a big fan of his whenever I see his comments. There's some people I see their comments and I just go, not gonna look at those. Reborn Odin is not one of those. He is actually someone I kind of seek out to see what he has to say. So shout out to him.
Absolutely. And speaking of well thought out, I want to talk about Street Fighter lore this week, and because we've been discussing a lot of lore centered stuff as we get ready for SF5 and yada yada. We've talked about Luke's story last week, which wasn't the best, but interesting enough. And so we're getting ready for who knows what when it comes to Street Fighter 6.
John, I've got to combo break you, maybe even combo break it to Psycho Crusher, and ask our readers to leave a like on this video if they don't mind. What's this graphic here? What's this amazing graphic that got put together by?
They should psycho crush the like button. Yes, absolutely. Because we're going to talk about M. Bison today. Because M. Bison has been one of the biggest engines for the story. Why? Well, because he's the big bad guy. He's killed everybody's parents, and they're all coming out to him for revenge. And he's putting on a lot of the tournaments a lot of the times. So M. Bison, a lot of the story moves forward because of him and his actions, but then also Capcom has used him as a very specific engine to create new characters because M. Bison, as we know, uses psycho power, which is very stressful on the body, plus he's got everybody gunning for him all the time, so he creates new bodies that he can eventually move his soul into, although of course he always ends up in the same type of M. Bison body that we all know and love and hate, but he creates new ones, so that's how you get the likes of Cammy and the Dolls and probably Abel and Falk and Ed and Seth and others, because M. Bison just like, oh, I need extra bodies, and then they become sentient and all of a sudden they're their own characters. It's a very clever device that Capcom used to create new characters. It's a little bit tired at this point, so maybe don't just make everyone that comes in a new Bison clone, but Bison drives story big time, and Capcom has not always been all that linear with their story. In fact, it's always all over the place in terms of the different entries of the Street Fighter series and franchise being located at different times. And they don't always agree with one another. Why? Well, it's easy to see, because if you're doing a fighting game, you're primarily, your top priority is not going to be so much, well, I want to make sure this lines up story-wise. Your top priority is, I want to do something with a character, whether that make them more buff or less buff in Bison's case, or give them a new move, or update them in some way. And so I'm going to do that. And then when you go to, so like say Street Fighter 2 Bison was created, right? And then you have this kind of like thin, skinny Bison that, you know, we all know. And then you go to Alpha, which took place before all of that, and he's suddenly buff and can throw a fireball. You're like, how did you do that? Well, it's probably because they wanted to make M. Bison a more of a formidable foe, and they've had more time to think about it and such. But they do explain that in the story to a degree, and I think that that's kind of cool. So at some places they will try to justify some of the things they've done, but there are just absolutely like just different stories that get told. And maybe if we do have a time travel story that goes back to Street Fighter Alpha, maybe that's going to open up two timelines, and then you'll be able to justify why there's two stories for how Nash died, for instance, things like that. But the main thing I want to do today is talk about the times, figure out the number of times M. Bison has actually died, how that happened, how he's come back, because Not only is it super interesting and relevant to a lot of other characters' stories, but also it might tell us whether or not to expect to see him in Street Fighter 6. So, we'll start at the beginning of the timeline, which is, oh, first of all, did you have any questions about that before we dive into
I
this?
have about
Questions,
a
comments,
million
concerns?
questions, but I don't know if we can even answer half of those. So we'll do the best we can here because
You
it's
won't.
yeah.
But Street Fighter, Capcom has almost always prioritized what they want to do with a character over whether or not they fit in the story. Case in point, Goken, he was killed by Akuma, although I've also heard Sagat. There you go. But he was dead, right? And then in Street Fighter 4, they said, well, we want to put Goken in here. And how? Well, we'll just say he was sleeping instead of dead. And muscle atrophy be damned. However long he was out, he just wakes up. He's still super buff, ready to go, and even maybe even more powerful now. And there you go. And people are like, well, I'm happy to have Goken, even if that makes zero sense. But here we go.
Yeah.
So M. Bison, he's not in Street Fighter 1, which is where everything starts. All right, fair enough. We get to Street Fighter Alpha. This is the first time we technically see Bison in the timeline, and he's that, like we said, that big buff version of himself that can throw fireballs, very formidable. He also has something called the Psycho Drive, which is this big, like sort of like a Cerebro for psycho power kind of machine, maybe a James Bond villain type of machine that helps him concentrate and use his psycho power even more effectively. Okay, so he's pissing everybody off. They come for him. He gets hit with a real big uppercut by Ryu. He retreats to his Psycho Drive where he's revitalizing himself, but Chun-Li, Nash, and Guile infiltrate his evil lair, and they set a bunch of explosives, and then Nash fights with Bison, while the other two, Chun and Guile, get the hell out of Dodge. Nash stays behind to make sure that Bison is in this place when it explodes, and thus he sacrifices himself to kill M. Bison. Now, right off the bat, you go, what about that whole story with the waterfall and the attack helicopter that accidentally shot Nash and then Bison throws him off of the waterfall? That seems to be canonical because Street Fighter V calls back to that constantly. You're right, that happens in Alpha, I think 2 it was, but Bison doesn't die there. And there's a big part of Rose's story where Bison uses Rose's body, or rather, Bison's lackeys put his soul into Rose's body following his death in Alpha. And then she's very much tied to Bison after that. So that's a super important part of Rose's story that as far as I can tell, would not happen if Bison and the waterfall thing all happened. So Bison dies because of this explosion, and then what happens is his I don't know if his body's officially found or not, but his scientists are somehow able to harness his soul, and they place it into Rose's for a time until they're able to make the body that you see in Street Fighter 2, which is thinner and different, and it's not as strong. And then Rose wakes up, and when she's given her body back, essentially, and she's kind of got some foggy memory, and now she's connected to Bison, yada yada. So that takes us to Street Fighter 2. Bison has died
before we get there
one time so far.
Yeah, I have a question. What the hell?
Yeah. Buckle up, Buckaroo, because here we go.
It's pretty much like they took pages of a book, threw it into a blender, and grinded up all the pages, and then reassembled the pages, and then that's the plot, pretty much. Does that seem accurate for what you know? Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it gets they turn up the blender.
Oh boy!
So in Street Fighter 2, Bison sets this tournament up once again. He's wanting to get Ryu because Ryu has so much potential. He's one of the greatest fighters on the planet, and he hasn't even realized his potential, which makes him a great body for Bison to potentially inhabit. So he's trying to get Ryu to pop up, and does, although it's not even clear who wins Street Fighter 2's tournament. I know that we did a segment on it and you came to a final conclusion. You can absolutely check out that video where we talk about it, but it's not exactly clear who was going to fight Bison as like the final match of the tournament. But someone who didn't even sign up on Smash GG, Akuma, pops up, zips in, and kills Bison with a Raging Demon. Now this is particularly potent because a Raging Demon, the way it works is it reacts directly in relation to how much malice and sin is in the soul of the victim. And M. Bison might be the most evil character in this entire universe. So when Akuma Raging Demons Bison, it's like the most intense Raging Demon you can think of, and it kills him. But the thing is, even that is not, that's widely accepted as canon and fair enough. But then in the lead up to Street Fighter 4, there were these things called the Street Fighter 4 Aftermath, and they released these little animated, like kind of trailers. They were like 5 minutes, and I think there were about four of them as a way to promote Street Fighter 4 before it came out. And in Sea Vipers, there's sort of an alternate take. After Street Fighter 2, Bison is sort of chased out of his area in Thailand with his big temple by the likes of Ryu, Ken, Chun, Guile, and Cammy. And they surround him out in the wilderness, and they're going to beat him. And he's in this big cannon because they've had this big anime fight, and there's, craters and stuff like that. Bison psycho suicides and blows himself up. And that blasts all of these characters, but it doesn't kill any of them. It's kind of is like a Vegeta sort of a thing in the Majin Buu saga. That's how he dies, according to the pre-Street Fighter 4 lore. Now, that's not as widely held as the whole Raging Demon thing. But if you remember, in Street Fighter 4, Bison has a particular costume where he's just kind of like destroyed and burnt up, and like his clothes are all messed up. I think that's a reference to this moment where he blew himself up. So you know which costume I'm talking about?
I know exactly which costume. Yeah, and we'll flash it up here on screen. Yeah, that was an interesting costume that they did, and I always kind of wondered what that was representative of.
And what is it?
Yeah, well, it's exactly like what they did with Evil Ryu, right? There, he got the damaged chest and all that. He had the wound in there, and that was part of the what if kind of scenario. So they made that a costume, right? So that's fascinating.
Right. So I think that's where that destroyed costume comes from. Now, whether he was killed by Akuma or by Psycho's suicide, the events of him coming back from death number 2 are very vague. It's just like his scientists found him and put him in a new body again for Street Fighter 4, and he was sort of operating in the background for a lot of it, although giving orders to some of his lackeys like Balrog and Vega and such. But Seth takes sort of center stage for the majority of SF4 as your main bad guy. Bison lurks in the background, but he was revived yet again, which doesn't make any sense with the whole with the whole Raging Demon thing, because it directly attacks his soul. Like, if anything were to kill M. Bison, it should be the Raging Demon. But, I mean, even that doesn't stop him. So, we zip along to Street Fighter 4. He doesn't die.
Akuma's truly a weak character because he can't kill anyone. Literally. Yeah. He can't kill anyone. Like, this is... Akuma.
He gets stopped by Guy. He doesn't get Gen. Apparently it worked on Bison, but also it didn't. It worked on Gen, but also, Gil, but also it didn't. Come on, Akuma, what are you doing here?
That big banner on our website, is Akuma a weak character? We finally answered the question. It's finally been answered. He is.
Finally been answered. Yes, absolutely. Shouldn't be losing to him. Okay, so Bison's died officially twice now. Gosh, yeah, old us, old podcast us. Why are you complaining about Akuma? So a lot of us have seen the story in A Shadow Falls of what happens to Bison. Now, this is arguably the strongest Bison has ever been, is in Street Fighter V, even possibly stronger than he was in Street Fighter Alpha. Why? Because he's launched all of his Chaos Moons or whatever it is. Also, the world is divided, and Trump and all that stuff is going on in 2016. So there's a lot of chaos is the point. And so Psycho Power thrives off of chaos, and it's widespread across the planet. So Bison becomes extremely powerful. But Ryu finds balance in the Satsui no Hado and the power of nothingness by defeating Nikali. And then he shows up. Charlie Nash, who has been resurrected, as we know, sacrifices himself to absorb a substantial amount of Bison's Psycho Power. And then Ryu is able to hit him with the little floofiest, poofiest power of nothingness Hadouken. But that is enough to slowly but surely disintegrate Bison. And he laughs maniacally as he slowly kind of like evaporates away. But this is the third time Bison has been officially killed. And technically, this is where we're at, because after this, he's gone, and he doesn't show up in the events of Street Fighter 3, which is the final one on the timeline. So Bison's officially died 3 times, but we've heard of him dying, I guess, 4 times. Because of the whole Street Fighter 4 self-suicide thing.
That's interesting, because his body type does change from Street Fighter 2 to Street Fighter 4, and then Street Fighter 4, you could argue his body is different, but he also has white hair, so it's kind of like he's aging, and he's doing the rapid aging thing that Bison always does, right? And that Falk and Ed are doing and stuff. It's fascinating, and also maddening to try to figure out. There it is. So.
Yeah. So, and then there are some non-canonical versions. Like there's the Street Fighter 2 movie where Ryu and Ken take him on, and they kill him with the double Hadouken. But then, spoilers, I believe in the credits he pops up and he's like in a truck or something like that, and it's like he didn't actually die, which fine, whatever. And then, of course, the greatest portrayal of M Bison that has ever happened was Raul Julia, yeah, Julia, I think it is. Sorry, Raul,
Julia,
if I pronounced it wrong. Julia, we're gonna go with that. Where where Guile roundhouse kicks him into his giant, massive evil lair screens. Those explode, and then he's off the air, and his entire temple explodes, and we're gonna assume that he's gone there. And then there was also something Chun-Li's movie with Chris Pine or whatever that. Who cares? That didn't happen. So Bison's died that many times, I guess. 3 times officially in canon, and I think one of them is a replacement. So like 3.5 times, we'll say. Will he be in Street Fighter 6? If Ryu's kill in Street Fighter 5 was indeed significant and lasting, which there's nothing to tell us that it would be. But if it was, I think Bison doesn't show up in SF6, except for the fact that if they're going back in time, he's going to be around during the alpha days. And so that it could be interesting that if they do this, maybe where Bison fights Nash on the waterfall and where Bison fights Nash in the facility are just 2 timelines. Capcom actually might be able to make, with timeline or with time travel rules, make some of their stuff make sense. But there is the convoluted, weird history of M. Bison. That's how many times he died. Do you have any other questions? Or have I answered any of your questions?
You've answered a bunch of questions and then spawned like many more. Like the hows, the whys. Everyone knows Rose is my favorite character. How did that go? All that other kind of stuff. I know a little bit of that where it's like they basically extracted the good parts of Bison's soul and like somehow that's Rose. I don't know how exactly, but sure, pretty much.
Cool.
Yeah, that's how it kind of goes. But no, it's actually really cool to hear the breakdown here, and it's a good idea to, that we have a heads up if Bison is going to kind of make it. There's usually the Ghost or Phantom version of him in Street Fighter 5. I could see that version being in Street Fighter 6 as well, because no one truly ever dies.